I'm here today with Rob Seliger, who is the CEO and founder of Sentillion, which is now integrated in the Healthcare Solutions Group in Microsoft, where he is a general manager of product management for the corporation. So thank you, Rob. And I'm going to ask you a few questions about the case.
Great.
So what were the origins of Sentillion, Rob, and why did you decide to try a spin-out of the technology rather than just build a new product line inside of, at that time, Hewlett-Packard Medical Group?
Well, the answer is I actually did try to do as you suggest. I was an 18-year veteran of Hewlett-Packard Medical Products Group. In fact, I joke that other than my newspaper route, HP was the only job interview I ever had in my life, and dedicated fully to the company. Came up with an idea of how to better integrate information systems, particularly in a hospital environment, but quite honestly, we couldn't figure out how to make a business of it given the context in which Medical Products Group was operating. And one day it just hit me, perhaps somewhat influenced by hanging around with the likes of you for several years, that maybe the way to get the technology in the market was not to do it inside of the confines of HP, but rather to create a company that could bring it to market. And they agreed once I made the case, and as they say, the rest is history.
And what were the origins of the technology itself that was spun out?
So the challenge that all hospitals have, even today, so many years later, is that caregivers, so think nurses and physicians, to do their jobs are confronted with many different systems, applications from different vendors with different user interfaces, different interaction idioms and styles. And in order to work comprehensively, they need to interact with these different systems, which is untenable, particularly if you think about serving hundreds of patients during the course of the day. So we saw an opportunity to create an integration technology that made it appear to the end user as if all these different applications were behaving as one system, even though they were still separate pieces. And what was happening in Medical Products Group is that we had our own collection of applications that had been developed over the years by different teams throughout a very large part of Hewlett-Packard Medical Products Group was. And our own stuff was every bit as disparate as random vendor technology in the market in that mid-90s era. So we started to look at how to solve our own problem and realize, wow, we're onto something bigger than just, a Band-Aid, if you will, for our own fix. This could solve a lot of challenges that the overall industry faces. So that's how it came about.
And how long did you work on it as an internal HP team on the core integrative software before actually doing the spin-out?
So the idea started somewhere around 1995. We put a team together in the 96 time frame. And the spin-out was the I's were dotted and T's were crossed, and legal documents were finished in November '98. So full run, I'd say, 3+ years.
Yeah, so it's a substantial investment by Hewlett-Packard in software development to solve a really hard problem.
Yeah, and like a lot of things, it started as your proverbial skunk works, right, and grew a little bit and grew a little bit more and got more visibility. What was also good about it, too, is because the way we did it, it wasn't a sudden thing, right? It wasn't an idea that came out of the blue. A lot of the executives at HP were familiar with the technology and the problem it solved. So we didn't have to spend a lot of time explaining what this is all about. The explanation was why it would be better in the hands of a third-party independent company than in the hands of Hewlett-Packard.
Now it's 2011, and the company was acquired in 2010. What did Sentillion grow into in terms of market leadership, its range of customers, and even geography? And then the second part of the question, even with all this tremendous growth, what has remained the company's core focus, its platform?
Yeah. So to answer your question, I just need to give a very, very brief history. As I mentioned in the answer to your first question, the company started mainly as a way to integrate disparate applications. But we quickly realized 2 years into the Sentillion business that was not a compelling enough reason in the marketplace to sell product at the scale we wanted. And to make a very long story short, we repositioned the company centered around what is now called identity and access management. So think of it, that's not a term we made up, it's an industry term, but for healthcare, think of it as solving the problems of security and patient privacy relative to electronic information systems, medical record systems, clinical information systems. So we repositioned the company, applied the same technology plus added stuff, but at the core of it, it was a different way of thinking about what we did. The other thing you need to understand is that the fundamental reason people bought the technology, customers bought it, wasn't for privacy and security, as odd as that sounds, but because of the way it enabled caregivers, particularly physicians, to be more productive. So we were the classic, it tastes great and is less filling play in the marketplace. And with that said, when we were acquired last year, we had close to 1,500 hospitals, mostly in the U.S., a number of the leading hospitals, they're known as trusts in the UK, and an emerging presence in Canada as well. But the center of the business was still primarily domestic. We had over 500,000 caregivers using our systems every day on clinical desktops throughout the country and throughout England and Canada, as I just mentioned. And so the footprint was quite substantial. We grew into the largest vendor in the category. We were the largest identity and access management vendor in healthcare.
I know that, Rob, that you are a big believer in user-centered design for new software development or any product development. Yeah. And I'm sure that you spent a little bit of time, that's facetious, a lot of time in hospitals understanding a day in the life of the physician or the nurse. Yeah. Could you just tell us a little bit about what that brought to you as a designer of this breakthrough technology?
Yeah. So I'd like to introduce a new term, just thinking of it as I'm sitting here. I call it empathetic design. Okay, so empathy is where you can put yourself basically in the shoes of somebody else and imagine what they're feeling, even if you yourself are not feeling it at the moment. And I can tell you, Mark, exactly where I was when I had the idea for the technology that ultimately became Sentillion. At Hewlett-Packard, I was one of the small group of people that was brought in when important customers came to visit and, rolled out the big corporate vision story and what we were doing in healthcare and medical systems and information systems and on and on and on. And I was standing in front of a group, if I recall correctly, from Kaiser, and nurses and doctors, and I was talking about a new architecture we were developing that was going to integrate all this data and all this information on their behalf. And as I'm talking to them and showing my slides and going through my whole story, it occurred to me that I'm talking to some of the smartest, most highly trained people on the planet. And what do they do all day long? They integrate information. But the but is they integrate information from paper, from faxes, from phones, from people talking to them, patients, other caregivers. Rarely were computers part of the integration story. And the reason is because the computers were too hard to use. I called it the last inch problem. All that information is sitting there, but for example, to have to log on to 8 different applications with 8 different passwords and IDs, or to have to select the same patient and type in a 16-digit medical record number, which, by the way, may be different in different applications for the same real-world person. It's just crazy. It would be like getting in your car in the morning and have a different key for every wheel and a different gas pedal for every wheel. I mean, who would drive a car that way? And yet we're expecting nurses and doctors in truly mission-critical situations to interact with their computers. And it occurred to me that we were, as an industry, solving the wrong problem. It wasn't about integrating the data. Not to trivialize that, that's useful, but that wasn't the big problem. The problem was getting access in the first place. And I just couldn't imagine what it was like, or could imagine, I should say, what it was like.
And who was the first person that you went running to with that aha, that idea?
So at first it was a low-key aha. All right, like a lot of things, you're kind of, am I thinking clearly here or am I just delusional? So we started to do some simple prototypes. We started to show it to some folks. I'll tell you one of the seminal moments was we did a prototype of some cardiology applications that we put together in a demo for the American Congress of Cardiology. I believe that's what it stands for, ACC, conference in 1996. And in the big HP booth, in the center of it, we had a pavilion with this workstation showing this new integration approach. And we had a line of people, Disneyland style, just serpentine line of people waiting to see what we had done. And I thought, we're on to something here. And there were a whole series of events that followed afterwards. We got a lot of excitement from the folks at Duke University, for example, that wanted to pilot and start rolling some of the early versions of this technology out in real care environments. I mean, the list went on and on and on. But it was clear that that empathetic moment was a real moment, and that led to an insight that to this day, in 96, where are we, how many years later, 15 years later, is still powerful and plays and solves real problems that caregivers face every single day.
That's great. What advice do you have for young entrepreneurs in terms of getting into venture finance and thinking about whom they wish to take money from?
Well, that's a question I could go on for many hours about. But let me see if I can distill the answer down to a couple of comments. And I think the world of venture capital has changed very, very much since when we raised money. You're correct. It was 3 rounds. For the record, it was $30 million over those 3 rounds in 98, 99, and 2000. And then we didn't go back to the well after that at all. But I'm very close to a number of venture capitalists. I talk with them. I understand. I watch how their businesses have evolved. And the world has changed. I think today, doing it again, and I do help companies do it. I'm on a board of a small New Jersey company where they're looking to take their first institutional round. So I'm right in the middle of this as you asked the question. Number one is that use your network. An introduction, no matter how indirect it is still better than a cold call or an unsolicited email that you drop in. So use your network, figure it out, and find an introduction. Number two is that the irony of venture capital today is that the money you're seeking. Let me say this differently. The objections a venture capitalist is going to have to giving you money is the very reason you're looking for money in the first place. So you'll say, I'd like money to hire a sales team. And the venture capitalist will say, gee, I'd give you money if you had a sales team, right? So you've got to anticipate the catch-22, this conundrum, and figure out how you can position yourself so that you can deal with what will be a series of objections about why a venture capitalist might not want to invest in your company today. In terms of the relationship, well, everybody wishes that they could create a company and spin it in 18 months, or maybe a lot of people wish that. The point is that these relationships are going to be much longer. There's no IPO market to speak of. All right, flipping companies was a vogue notion that lasted for a couple of years. So these are long-term relationships you're building. So pick your partners wisely. All right, make sure that not only do they bring money, do they bring resources, but they bring a personality and a style that you can live with for the long term.
Is looking back on your experience as a successful technology entrepreneur, what were the key milestones that you accomplished in the first 2 or 3 years of the business? And how would you generalize those milestones into things for new entrepreneurs to consider as they plan out what happens next once they get the money?
Yeah. So I think there are probably 3 key things. There are many things you have to do in that first year. Some of them are very mundane. Get office space, right? Get a website, things like that. But those aren't seminal things. Those are check-the-box things. I think there are 3 things that one does in those first 3 years that sets the trajectory probably for the rest of the company. First and foremost is the team. It's unusual that an entrepreneur will start a company and suddenly instantly have his or her team assembled. You have to go build out the management team and not just the management team, but people throughout the organization. I'm very proud when I look at Sentillion's history, for example, how many people we hired in that first year that were still with the company when we transacted with Microsoft. And it wasn't just legacy people lying around. These people were there because they had consistently provided value at all levels of the organization from its inception to its acquisition. So team is everything, and you'll make that imprint. People will change, right, over the course of time, but you'll make that imprint, and you will set a culture, a style, and a dynamic in that very first year. That's number one. Number two is you got to get customers. This is otherwise a theoretical exercise, and the longer it takes you to get customers, the more there's going to be doubt about whether you've got something that actually is useful in the marketplace. And 3 is proving out the business model. Now, I make a distinction between price points and business models. So when I think of business model, how do you go to market? How do people find your products? How do they acquire it? How do you deliver it? How do you implement it? How do you service it? What are the licensing constructs or subscription, perpetual, all these other things? You'll constantly play with price points, right, as time goes on and as competition comes in or as you add new offerings. But if you can build a team, build an initial customer base, and prove out your business model in those first year or 2, you've set the trajectory for the rest of the history of the company.